I got a text saying, "Carli, please be there." And I just thought that he was struggling a little more than usual that day. And I messaged him back and I was just saying, "Hey, I'm here. What's wrong?" And essentially, he had found a gun in his house and he was talking about possibly using it. And I didn't know if he was scared he was going to use it in the future or if he had plans of using it right then and there.
In this episode of In the Shadows, Mental Health and Suicide, Carli's story.
Welcome to In the Shadows, where we shed light on difficult issues right here in our community. I'm Patty Lemons. When we hear about suicide, our hearts automatically go out to the families of those who were lost, especially the parents when it happens to a teenager. But imagine being a teenager and trying to process the loss of a friend. Now imagine being a teenager who was on the receiving end of the final text messages from a suicide victim. Carli Snyder was just 15 years old when she received some disturbing text messages from her best friend, who was ready to take his own life. She and a couple of other friends tried their best to intervene and prevent a tragic outcome, but ultimately, they just couldn't get to him in time. When Carli joined me in the studio, my intent was to interview her as a supporting role for a podcast about her friend. But it quickly became clear that Carli had been on her own journey with mental illness and suicidal tendencies, and she and her family have fought for her life since his death. Now, out of respect for him, I've inserted bleeps over his name, which I don't like to do that, but I felt it was necessary for this story. What you're hearing is a very raw interview that I was not prepared for, and I have to say it's been the hardest one for me to produce. I've personally known Carli for a few years, and she and one of my daughters were introduced by their music mentor, Jason Spell, who we featured in another podcast. And the two of them have played a few shows together. Carli is one of the sweetest, silliest, most loving kids I've ever met. We had an instant connection with her family, and while it's been really hard to produce this, I'm also honored to bring you a story of hope. Carli is a survivor and is still fighting to cope with the aftermath of this terrible tragedy. And she's only 17 years old.
And so I was asking him questions and asking him if he needed me to contact his mom for him because I didn't know if he was too scared to do it himself or what the situation was. And he got a little more intense because I don't think I was telling him what he wanted to hear. To this day, I'm not sure what he wanted me to tell him. But with every response I gave him, it's almost like he got angrier. And that was a side of I'd never seen before. I knew a that was kind and compassionate and peaceful, and that was just the complete opposite of the I knew. And I knew something was wrong. I knew that something was extremely wrong. And then, long story short, he ended up blaming me right before he pulled the trigger. And I was in the middle of trying to do things like telling him why he needed to stay. And so he told me that it was my fault. And to him, he felt that I had abandoned him and that I didn't care about him anymore.
And how old were you?
I was 15 years old.
And you realize how huge that is for a 15-year-old to go through this.
Yeah, I handled it the best I could. And for a long time, I carried that guilt so strongly, truly believing it was my fault. It hasn't been until recently that I've truly understood that it wasn't. I know now that I've done everything that I could have to help him. I know now that none of it was my fault. I know now that I supported him in every way I knew how at the time. I was not at all educated on mental illness. I didn't know anything about it really. I thought I did, but I really didn't. And so to look back and know that I did so much despite knowing so little, I'm honestly pretty proud of myself looking back.
And I think we can all be proud of you for that. That's huge. And I mean, you're such a sweet girl, and I mean, I'm just so sorry that unfolded like that for you. How have you managed, and did you realize the magnitude of everything going on at the time?
If I'm being honest, I went into shock pretty soon after it happened. I didn't know what to call it, but I just knew I couldn't feel anything. My friends at school were terribly worried about me. They were trying to help me, but I didn't understand what they were trying to help me with because I didn't feel anything. At first, I wasn't even really grieving, and it was just, I didn't know what to do because I couldn't feel anything. I didn't care about school anymore. It seemed so pointless in the grand scheme of things. I would get in arguments with my friends because I was so insensitive due to that numbness that I couldn't be there for my friends when they needed me. I remember I would snap at my family members despite them trying to help me just because I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know how to describe what I was feeling. I remember going to my first therapy session and she was asking me questions. And one of the questions she asked me was, "How are you feeling today?" And I sat there in silence because it was such a numb feeling that there was no words to describe it. To this day, I still don't think I can really describe it as anything other than numb because it was just nothing, just a pure emptiness. And I would argue that I would rather feel sad than feel like that ever again.
So tell me about your journey then.
My journey has been heavily reliant on my family and friends. My mom, she has been so amazing. She's been doing so much research. She's read articles. She's gone to all kinds of specialists. She put me through therapy. She got me medications. She was very much headstrong and very much a leader in my journey. And of course, I relied on friends a lot because sometimes it's hard to tell your parents, your family, that they gave you a life and you don't want it. And I remember my family for a long time didn't understand why I didn't talk to them. And I'm sure plenty of other families struggle to understand why their kids might not talk to them. But for me personally, it was just so hard to know that my parents fought for, got money, finances to try and give me a life that would be beneficial and be very just good for me. And to know that my parents worked so hard to give me a good life and that I didn't want it. And that's just, it's so hard to tell your parents that.
You didn't want your life. Can you tell us more about that?
I think it stems from the guilt I felt. To be blamed for someone's suicide, you often see the story of the person who committed suicide, and that's always portrayed to be the victim. Whoever killed themselves is the victim in the suicide. Well, that's not always necessarily true. There's other victims when a suicide happens, and I happen to be one of them. And to know that who was the kindest person I'd ever met hated me so much in his last moments, hated me so much, and he felt that I was the reason that he wanted to die. You know, whether it was true or whether he was just so angry at the time he just blurted that out, that's what he was feeling at the time. So to know that someone who was so peaceful and kind had so much hatred for me, I didn't want to live like that. And I didn't want to live with the guilt, and I didn't want to live knowing that I may have been the reason someone died. It was just hard to live like that.
This is hard to hear. So when I originally asked Carli to be a part of this, I didn't realize what she had gone through. And so hearing this, I think it's very eye-opening for all of us to think about the people around the people, the friends, the family, who've taken their lives by suicide. Tell us a little more. Let's dive a little bit deeper then into what you went through and why you felt helpless.
Well, before died, I was overall a very happy girl. I had a great group of friends. I had a loving family. I had a lot going for me. I was doing good in journalism. I was doing good in school in general. I was very musically inclined in band. I had a lot of things going for me. I was overall happy. And for one set of text messages to completely destroy that, it gave me post-traumatic stress disorder. And basically, anytime someone would text me and it was a vague text, if I didn't know what the conversation was going to lead to, sometimes I would have panic attacks. And I was in constant fear that someone else would do the same thing. And so it really affected so many of my relationships. And I was scared to get too close to people sometimes, out of fear that I would get too close and then I would have some reason to leave them and then they would have a reason to die.
So tell me your thought process. You said you didn't want to live. And that's so hard for everybody to understand. You're such an awesome person, Carli. You really are. Tell me your thought process.
Not wanting to live, it's a very gray area. It's not just you want to kill yourself or you don't. A lot of times I wanted to die, but I was not suicidal. And that's something that's also not talked about very often. It's almost like if I were in a road and a car were coming at me, I wouldn't throw myself in front of the car, but I wouldn't move out of the car's way. It's just I was accepting in the fact that if I were to die, I'd be okay with that. I don't have a huge interest in living. I don't have a huge tie to being here. And it's a side of suicidal tendencies that aren't brought up, because in some ways that's still a suicidal tendency, but a lot of people don't voice their thoughts on that because they feel like, oh, I'm not going to kill myself, so I don't need to talk to anyone about this. But the reality is that's a gray area of suicidal tendencies that still needs to be talked about and still needs to be taken care of.
You sound like you're doing really well. I know your mom knows you still have a road ahead of you, because this has changed you forever. Tell me how you're doing now and what you're looking forward to in life.
I'm doing better now for sure. Through therapy and through support from my friends and family and just having a will to get better, because that's another thing you have to think about. If the person doesn't want to get better, they won't. If they're not putting forth that effort to get better, they won't. And I had a will to get help after my parents had found a half-written suicide note. I hadn't finished it yet because I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. Because how do you tell the people around you that you're going without hurting them? Because I didn't want to hurt anyone when I went. I wanted everyone to have closure. That's why I wrote the note. I wasn't writing the note to blame anyone. It wasn't for any reason other than to give people closure, because I didn't get closure. All I got was the blame. And so I wanted to at least give people peace of mind before I passed. And I was certain that I was going to pass. I was certain that there was no future ahead of me. And that suicide note led me to Heartland Mental Hospital in Nevada. And there I saw other people who had it a lot harder than I did. And I think a lot of people can agree. I had a pretty rough time. And so to see that there are other people out there who have it harder, and to see that there are other people out there who both have it harder and are having a will to get better, it made me realize that I can get better too.
Did those feelings ever come back?
I think the feelings of wanting to die come back occasionally, and it's more of an itch in the back of my head. It's not a complete thought. It's more of a, hey, there's still an opportunity for all of this pain to be gone. When I know firsthand that the pain doesn't leave, it just goes to someone else, and I'm the other person that pain went to for. And I still love and I will still cherish as a friend forever, but because of him, I have depression and I still have some PTSD and I have anxiety, and I can attribute that to his death. And so another thing that keeps me from having those thoughts too prominently is the idea that I could pass it on to other people I love. And I love so many people. I have so many good friends and so many supportive members of my family that I can't imagine doing this to them too.
What do you hope for the future?
I don't think my mental illnesses are ever going to go away completely. I think that what I went through was just so traumatic that it's never going to be completely gone. But I know that I will be able to manage it no problem one day. I'm managing it now, but there are still days it's hard. Just a few days ago, I was going through what's called a depression sleep, which is when you're just sleeping because you're so sad and you're not getting any rest, and you wake up more exhausted than when you fell asleep. And sometimes I still have those days where I just sleep the whole day away. I can't get out of bed. I can't be productive. I can't do anything. But it is more manageable than it was. And sometimes to this day, it still affects my relationships on occasion. You know, with friends and everyone else, I'll get anxiety that they're going to leave, that they're going to kill themselves too. I still have that anxiety, but it's just not as prominent as before. And I know that in the future, it's going to be less and less prominent, and it'll be more and more manageable. And that's what the fight is for.
Are you able to put a pause on all of that and dream about your future?
I think my future, what I want for my future is I'm an aspiring journalist, and I have this dream of just having a nice little house and writing for a cute little newspaper and having a cute little dog and just being so genuinely comfortable with myself.
This is huge that you would be so vulnerable to everybody listening to this, and I really, really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want us to know?
I think that vulnerability is not the same as weakness. Vulnerability allows people to understand and know what's going on in everyone's situations, and more people need to know how to be vulnerable. I got so low and vulnerable that I needed therapy. I went to a mental hospital, I was on medications, and it was a very long ride, and I'm still on that journey. But the thing is, I'm getting better, and I'm doing better than I ever have since everything has happened. I think it's important to know that you're going to be incredibly vulnerable. There are going to be days when all of your cards are out and you can't do anything about it. And I think it's important to make that vulnerability your choice, or else ultimately you're going to crumble. So you can either be vulnerable on your own terms, or life is going to force you to be vulnerable. And so just knowing that when you speak out about what's going on, you're either helping yourself or you're helping other people. And so it's important to know that it's okay to talk about everything, and it's okay to need help. It's okay to need a lot of help. It's just, pain is relative, and everybody's situation is different, and everyone's going to need different types of help. And some people are going to need more help than others. I needed a lot of help, and that's okay, and I'm okay with that. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I needed help. And I think it needs to be less of a stigma, and less people need to feel ashamed of needing that extra help. I think that it's actually a sign of strength when you can be vulnerable.
And that was perfect. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think it's just important to know also that mental illness does not have a face. Mental illness does not have a certain size or shape or popularity level or gender or race. Anyone can feel anything. And I think it's important to understand that even the happiest, bubbliest person can be so sad. And I think that more people need to be reaching out and asking everyone. I know at school that I'm a very joking, happy, jolly person, generally, whenever I'm not irritated by the crowds of people in the hallways. But also, I am extremely sad a lot of the time, even to this day. It's still really hard for me to get out of bed on some days. It's still really hard for me to go out and be social. It's still hard for me to do my work in classes, to have that motivation. But last year I struggled with grades and everything, and this year my lowest grade is an 80%. So to go through such a jump, to be able to see my progress in everything, every aspect of my life is so fulfilling, and that it's important to know that anyone can get better.
Carli, thanks for being here. Thank you for your vulnerability. I think this is going to help a lot of people in understanding mental illness.
Well, that's ultimately the goal, to bring awareness and help people understand and convince people that it's okay to reach out and get help. If people only get one thing from this podcast, I want it to be that it's okay to need help, it's okay to reach out for help, and it's okay to help out others in any way you think you can.
I think we can all agree that Carli has a wonderful future ahead of her, and I have no doubt that she's going to do great things. Here for an impromptu interview as well as Carli's mom, Tracy Snyder. And as I mentioned before, when I reached out to Carli, I had no idea the impact this had on her. Tell me about the last several months and what you guys have been through.
I'm okay. I just need a moment.
Sure.
Because I do want to do this. It has been a pretty inexplainable ride. You have this daughter that's always happy. And I remember her when she was young. In the morning, she'd wake up and automatically have a smile. First thing. Happy from the moment she woke up till she went to bed. Of course, she started becoming a teenager, and that changed a little bit. She is that girl that is always there for her friends. She mothers, she helps, she guides, she counsels. That has always been her. So when texted her, it was natural for Carli to try to help. And she has felt guilty, wondering if she didn't get help soon enough. But she did reach out to people, and there were people on the way, and there were people that contacted the police, and there were people trying to contact the high school principal. Carli has suffered with a lot of guilt. One thing I notice about her there are two emotions she feels easily now. Those are shame and guilt, and it takes very little for her to feel those. And I think she has questioned, and she has felt shame, and she has felt guilt, wondering if she handled that night correctly. As a mom, looking back at it, I think she was a hero. For a 15-year-old girl to be able to get friends, those people that knew where lived, and there was response. They contacted the police. They were trying to contact the principal. Everyone was working to get to. Unfortunately, it was just a little too late.
How did she react afterwards?
There was the numbness, and which I thought of her numbness as being the shock, and she was in shock for quite a while. And then we found out her music teacher, that was her music mentor, they had this wit, they had this banter, they had this connection, and he is the person outside of our family Carli would have gone to talk to, and that same day he as well killed himself. And she was staring at two suicides of two people very close to her.
I'm a mom. I know how hard that is to watch your child go through something like that, and for it to have the impact on her that it did, and for her to lose two people that she was close to. Nobody should ever have to experience that. They certainly shouldn't have to experience it at 15 years old. How do you help her through that?
It's a blind journey for a parent when you've never been through it. You're trying to figure out if you need to work with the counselors at school, if you need to get her a counselor, if she needs medication, if she needs to stay home from school. A million possibilities are hitting you, and you're afraid every moment whatever decision you make may be the wrong one and may harm her more. So you're always searching for anything that can give her even the tiniest lift, the tiniest amount of healing, because you don't know how to pull your child out of this.
What led you to taking her to get help?
I was extremely fortunate to have had some people reach out to me. One was affiliated with the Lost and Found Grief Foundation, and another one set me up immediately for her to go through horse therapy. And, I let Carli take the lead on this because this was a journey. I mean, I was there and I made decisions too, but she has always been a very strong-willed girl, and she's always known what she wants, and she tends to know what's good for her. The initial counseling lasted for a while, and she kind of decided that maybe this isn't the counselor for me. So I said, okay. We stopped, and then she continued with horse therapy for several months. As the 1-year anniversary of death approached, she took a huge dive. She was going through a downward spiral and wasn't coming up. We got her on medication, We had started with a new counselor that was very helpful. After one of Carli's counseling sessions, I knew she was in trouble, and we got in. Her counselor got us in, and the counselor came out and advised that we immediately go to the emergency room. And so we did. We went to the emergency room, and we told her, Carli actually told them she was having suicidal thoughts. And from the emergency room, then we were able to get additional help and got her to Heartland in Nevada. And that was after having found a half-written suicide note that I would not have found if it was not for one of her best friends telling me she had started writing it. Without him, I never would have known. I never would have found this note without him.
How in the world do you deal with something like that?
You fight for your daughter. You just keep going. You just fight for her. You try anything. You do anything. If it's the medication, if it's the counseling, if it's the friends coming over constantly so you can see her laugh, you do it.
Tell me about the journey since then.
There is great improvement. She has a fantastic counselor through Nexus Schools by the name of Mr. Minks, and he has been an incredible advocate. And because she was such a good student and her grades started plummeting, he really advocated for her, and that really helped her get over the hump of the grades coming down, and she has been able to start her junior year on a much more positive note, and she's seen, my grades are up, I can still go to college, I may still get a scholarship, I may still be a journalist. There's a lot of hope that was not there before.
It's easy for me and for you to see how awesome Carli is. It's so easy. She's so awesome. She's the sweetest kid around. What do you hope for her?
I just want her dreams to come true. I want her to wake up and feel good. I don't want her to be sad. I want her to have the future she wants. I want her to have peace. And if she wants to be an advocate for mental illness, I want that. If she wants to be a journalist, I want that. But I wanted her to have a long, fulfilling, happy life.
Are you angry with?
There have been times where I was very angry with for the hurt that my daughter had. And I know that may sound bad. And what got me through that is every time I had that thought, I would think of his mom and dad and how much they would do anything in the world to be in my shoes, to still have their boy here. And that's what got me through.
I know that your house is an open house. Anybody can come there. You have kids around all the time. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I have kids show up all the time. Doors open, I hear my dogs barking, and I go and look, and everyone's welcome in my home. They get treated like a kid if they're there too. Carli's friendships have been very vital in feeling good and feeling better and having laughter and being uplifted. And those friendships are really critical, whether it is that friendship being someone that she's confiding in, whether it is teasing, whether it is laughter, whether it is, let's go to El Puente because I'm craving tacos like crazy.
What would you say to other parents who are really scared right now?
It is very hard, and sometimes it's very hard to get help. It is hard to get appointments. I got lucky. I knew people. They helped me. The next week, she was receiving counseling. I've also heard stories of people that it was a month or two before they can get in to go talk to a counselor. And that can be too late. A month or two can be too late. Be an advocate for your child. I know sometimes it seems like it's just teen angst and they're being difficult, but there was one night when after passed and Carli was in her room, and I went in there and I felt like I was being given the teen angst eye rolls and get out of my room. What I didn't realize at that particular moment is she was trying to fight off a panic attack. And I yelled at her because I didn't know. She was in that moment of building, and I didn't know what to do for her. And fortunately, my son did. My son, who is the biggest goofball, silly guy that I never would have thought, he knew what to do to calm her down out of an anxiety attack. And I didn't.
What did he do?
He did something that's, it's called 5-4-3-2-1. It's something along the lines of talking to the person and tell me 5 things you can see right now. Tell me 4 things you can hear. Tell me 3 things you can smell. It's a way of bringing their attention and bringing their focus into a different place so they can calm down.
What do you want us to know?
That it's really hard, that you have to fight, harder than you may ever realize, but there is hope, and they can feel better.
As a mom, are you letting down the guard a little bit?
Well, I'm around her most of the time, or I know where she is, or she's with friends. She's at marching band. She's with her boyfriend. She's with her friends. She's at a French meeting, or she's home. So I can tell she's doing better, but there are those days I can look at her and I know it's one of those days. But I also know she's right here with me and she's okay right now. So you just have to be thankful for all of those okay moments.
How do you feel now compared to a year ago?
I feel much better, much better about it. Not only did Carli have to deal with all of this, but 7 months later, after the deaths, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that was something to add on to her, and I felt an enormous amount of guilt and shame, which Carli understands those feelings because I was afraid I was hurting her more. I'm doing well, she's doing well, we're both pretty tough, so we just keep walking strong.
Tracy, thank you for sharing the story. That's really hard. I think a lot of parents will be able to relate, so I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
This interview with Carli and her mom took place several weeks ago when I first started this podcast project, and I've been in contact with both of them since that time. They're a little nervous about the story going public, understandably so, and I hope we can just all show them the love and support that they need to get through this difficult time in their lives. One thing Tracy asked me to add was that when you see your kids struggling and they're fighting to maintain to no avail, tell them, I want you to know how proud of you I am for fighting so hard. I know it's not easy. I know you're fighting, and I couldn't be more proud of you. Today's episode of In the Shadows is our final in our mental health and suicide series. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us, Mary Jane Holmes, Michaela Garnier, and Brock Cantrell, from NAMI, Deborah Biggs, and Stephanie Appleby. Also Kay Jackson, Deborah Lacey, Wendy Ryerson, Dave Coble, Kayla Reese, Dr. Mike Ferguson, Carli Snyder, and Tracy Snyder. Also, thank you to our sponsors, Smooth Transitions and Baby Grace. Music for the series was produced and donated by Nick Sibley, along with other music selections from Supercharge, Jason Spell, Lemon Drop Motel, Joy Worthley, and Carli Snyder. Through this series, I have learned, opened my eyes, and I have grown. I hope you've found the information valuable as well, and I truly feel like we can make an impact by sharing these stories with others. If you need immediate help, please call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the Crisis Helpline at 741-741. In Springfield, Missouri, you can also send a text to Dr. Mike Ferguson, psychologist, suicidologist, and mental health coach, at 417-501-9662. And on our final note, as I've said every episode, please remember to just be kind to everyone. We don't know what challenges others are facing on any given day, and a smile from you could turn their world around. We'll close this last episode with some music from Carli, playing a Beatles tune that we all know and love. Thank you so much for joining me.
When I was younger, so much younger than today, never needed anybody's help in any way. But now those days are gone and I'm not so self-assured. Now I find a change